really important, I think, for the industry and for all of us to work together to ensure that those younger people that are coming through the system that maybe want to take on those opportunities are empowered to take on those opportunities and provide two things: provide a business opportunity for those younger people coming through the system, and secondly, provide a step back mechanism for that farmer that has grown their business over that prolonged period of time.
Moorepark Open Day is only around the corner, and today I'm joined by Laurence Shalloo, Head of Animal and Grassland Programme for Teagasc, to preview what will be on show on Wednesday, July 2nd. Just to give us a bit of context about the Open Day, obviously we have it every 2 years, and it's trying to address the challenges maybe that are ahead of us and maybe facing us right in here and now as well. And I suppose over the weekend we've probably a challenge that's going to impact on farmers despite the distance of it, in terms of the attack on Iran the other day is probably going to impact on energy costs and so forth, which are already high. So I suppose since I started in the advisory service, we were building towards 2015, and we got to 2015, and it's been a fairly good journey since. So I suppose picking up on that, what's been good about it and what's been bad about it. And I suppose, to be fair, there's lots more good than bad in reality, isn't there?
There is, and I suppose there's a couple of points in what you've said there. The first one is, I think what we must realize now is that we're in a much, the world is constantly changing. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, or even 5 or 10 years ago, we thought maybe, change, a small thing happening would have a big change. But the world seems to be in a big flux now, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's pandemic, whether it's economic, or whether it's environmental. So all these things are changing. I suppose, go back to your point about, what has happened. I suppose sometimes we don't do this enough, and just have a quick look back and see what's happened, because we sometimes get stuck in the moment and are too busy at that. So it's 15 years now since we probably got the serious signal that milk quotas were going to be removed, since the industry started to expand, and it's 10 years since milk quotas have gone, and that 10 years went very quickly. What has happened in that period since that first signal? 15 years ago, that milk quotas are going to go, milk output up to 22, and probably quite similarly again in 2025, will have increased by very close to 100% in terms of milk solids. So that's a huge increase, even though, the target at that stage when that policy was being implemented was a 50% increase in milk output. So farmers overachieved that. But that's probably not surprising. 31 years of milk quota at that point, there was a huge amount of built up capacity. And I suppose, there's always going to be a reaction when you hold something back for that long. And I suppose that's what we've seen at farm level. And the change in the period since milk quotas have gone have been amazing, really, or very dramatic, in terms of, milk cow numbers increasing by probably, the guts of 50% on lots of farms. Nationally, cow numbers increased by over 50%. Milk solids output increased pretty dramatically over that period of time as well. So you have the combination of both productivity gain and increased cow numbers. And I suppose at the same time, you have more land entering into dairying over that period.
Obviously, that's a very good situation, I suppose. But there, like you said, and we do get stuck in the moment, and it was something I've been trying to make clear to people as well, is that we have a good story to tell. And even though we have challenges to overcome, we're coming from a very good base in the first place, despite what the media might have out there about this and that. But what lessons have we learned, I suppose, from the last 10 years in terms of the expansion phase? And I suppose you mentioned it there as well. The other question, I suppose, that I'd have for you, and you can take them separately if you want to, but you talked about the built-up capacity in the industry as well there. Is there a bit of a challenge coming in terms of people that were absolutely bursting waiting for quotas to be removed, have done the 10 years now, and because of the age that they were maybe in 2015, they're getting to the point of where they're nearly beginning to finish up their career in dairy farming almost, and they really enjoyed the last 10 years, but they've just gotten to that point where they're looking for the next person to come in, basically. So is that a challenge for us going forward?
Absolutely. No, and I suppose take your first question first, and go back to the last 10 years. I suppose up to 2020, we could say cost of production at farm level had remained pretty static over that period of time, you know. So we had all this expansion, but cost of production had held pretty solid. But since then, we've seen pretty dramatic increases in costs. Like I was looking recently at CSO data, and it showed a 50% increase in the input price, you know, input price index, which is absolutely huge. Now that was in 2022. It dropped to something close to low 40s in 2023, and has dropped again in 2024. So we should see costs drop based on that. Now, we sometimes, I suppose, we are a pasture-based system, so weather has a pretty big effect on our system. So, cost of production increased by 50% at farm level over the last 3 to 4 years. Some of that was inflation driven. Some of it is to do with weather events, and some of it's to do with maybe a little bit of a slippage in terms of less pasture in the system and more bought-in feed. So there's things there that we need to work on to make sure that we keep this overall business sustainable in the long term. That's the first point. The second point, in terms of generation renewal, absolutely. If you think about an industry pent up for 31 years, and then there's this growth, and absolutely there are situations now where people are maybe looking to step back a little bit. Very profitable businesses, very very good and strong potential earnings from those businesses, but they're maybe getting on a little bit and want to take a step back. So it's really important, I think, for the industry and for all of us to work together to ensure that those younger people that are coming through the system that maybe want to take on those opportunities are empowered to take on those opportunities, and provide two things: provide a business opportunity for those younger people coming through the system, and secondly, provide a step back mechanism for that farmer that has grown their business over that prolonged period of time. So that's probably, Stuart, one of our biggest priorities now today, to ensure that those kind of models are in place and can be utilized. And for me, for that younger person to be able to identify the right opportunity is probably the most important part, that they're technically capable of running these operations, and that they're able to, identify which one is best for them, because, not every opportunity is going to work for everyone.
Okay, so I might just explore that one with you a little bit now, because I suppose everyone will be familiar with kind of the share farming and the share milking type scenario coming from New Zealand. But the other question that arises with that, though, is the scale there in an Irish context for that to happen. Would say, like, there's often talk about the generational renewal options within Ireland relative to the likes of the New Zealand scale. Is it as feasible? Like,
I would argue strongly that we're probably in a better situation from an Irish context, because the one thing that we don't have en masse on Irish dairy farms is debt. There's relatively modest debt on most farms. The average, I think, debt from the National Farm Survey is maybe something like €1,000 per cow, which is relatively small when we look at internationally. We look at the Dutch and they're probably closer to 10,000 a cow. The Danes probably €20,000 a cow. And the New Zealanders 8,000 or 9,000. So that creates an opportunity. I suppose that's the first thing. Yeah, scale is an issue in some situations, but I suppose if we look at some of the things that have happened in the last, again, 5, 6, 7 years with the leasing model, scale is something that has been able, for many farms, not for everyone, but for many farms, scale is something that they've been able to address through leasing onto their own platforms. And to be honest, if the farm has been, if cost production are well under control and productivity and efficiency is good on the, growing plenty grass on the farm, the returns are very strong in that leased model once the things are done well. So I'd be slightly less worried about the scale being the issue. I don't think it's going to be the biggest barrier, because we know now that there are things we can do around scale.
Okay, so you mentioned something very important there in terms of that efficiency element of it. Like, so the average 100 cow farm in Ireland, if it's very well run, you and I know from looking at figures that they can be very profitable. So there is scope there, but the efficiencies have to be there. So I suppose to deal with that main one that you've mentioned there in terms of the role of grass in driving that efficiency, like, your objective now next week is to talk about growing 15 ton, and there'll be people listening to us today asking, have we lost our marbles? Like, it seems to be impossible to grow 15 ton with the last number of years. So I suppose can there be a recency bias maybe in some of our thinking, in that yes, we definitely have had some challenging years with the last few years, and like this year is actually, as it currently stands, is working out quite well. We seem to be getting rain when we need it. We're getting heat when we need it. For the vast majority of the country, there's some areas still getting pinched, but so that recency bias, I suppose, is it throwing us off in terms of what we think we can potentially grow, and then what are the challenges that we need to overcome to make sure that we can grow that again? And do we really need to refocus on that piece of the jigsaw? Like,
For me, it's the most important opportunity we have. It's really the reality is, and we talk a lot, but the reality is it's the only competitive advantage we have to be able to grow grass over a long grazing season and be able to graze it over a long grazing season. We don't have a Rotterdam for cheap grain. We're not sitting on the door of the market, so we don't have, these inherent advantages. The one we have is we can generally grow grass for a long grazing season. We get a little bit excited, and we're partial to it here ourselves in Moorepark, Stuart, to be honest, about climate and weather. And yeah, there is change happening. Absolutely, we have to say that. And over the last couple of years, there's been some struggles over the summer period around growing grass over. I'm slow to say drought. I would say restricted growth in situations. But there are other parts of the country that haven't been restricted. And just, pull down, is it still possible to grow 15 tons? Well, it's harder to grow 15 tons now because you're going to have to do it with less chemical nitrogen in the system. But does that mean we can't do it? Absolutely not. And, we look at pasture base and we look at the data regionally, consistently enough, we have a cohort of farmers in there that are growing very close to 15 and over 15 tons on a prolonged period of time. So, you look at, take Clonakilty and the studies that we're doing down there in 2024. The Clonakilty, which wasn't an ideal, by any stretch of imagination, year for growing grass. In 2024, with 150 kilos of nitrogen, Clonakilty grew 15.5 tons of grass in that trial. So yes, it's more difficult now than it was for two reasons: less nutrients, and the climate is having an impact. But the other thing is that we have to, I suppose, work on it. Whether soil fertility is correct. Like, I think the stats are 17% of even dairy farms, which we say are technically strong in general. Only 17% of those soils are optimum in terms of soil fertility. You're not going to grow 15 tons if you haven't optimal soil fertility. So there's lots of things we can do at farm level to increase that grass growth. Go back to your first point. The focus has to be on pasture. If we lose that advantage, and we're seeing utilization increase by roughly from 6.5 tons probably 10 years ago up to about 8.3, 8.4 tons on average on the average dairy farmer. And that has, over the last 2 to 3 years, has started going backwards slightly. And if we look at the proportion of bought in feed coming into the system, that was running at 80, 17, 18%, and that's gone to 21, 22%. So for me, there are two important points. They are the two we have to go after to ensure that we stay, stay sustainable, stay efficient, stay ahead of the curve.
okay, so Lawrence, I suppose just to wrap it up then, in terms of the changes that we've seen since the last open day, are there any other challenges outside of the people piece, we'll say, and the nitrogen, as you mentioned there, we'll say we have to live in a lower nitrogen regime. Are there any other challenges that we're going to have to be taken on, and how are we going to take them on, I suppose, in terms of Teagasc's view of it?
So I suppose for me, if we just stand back and look at some of the stuff that has been happening, greenhouse gas emissions are going the right direction. They went the right direction in 2023. They're now 4.1% below where they were in 2018. That needs to continue, right? So we can't take our leg off the gas there. And the key ones there have been around how, the type of chemical fertilizer and the levels of fertilizer as we get more technologies in. Obviously, things like DEBI and age of slaughter and all those things are contributing. But, emissions are dropping. I would expect emissions will drop again in 2024. So, and the EPA will be out with those numbers relatively soon. So that's the first thing. Second thing is in terms of water, and the really important for us, obviously, stock and rate is a key driver of efficiency and productivity in a pasture-based setting. So, the early indicators report from the EPA showed, significant reductions in nitrate concentrations in 2024 on, I think it was on 20 of our main rivers. So that's positive. We need to see that continue. And again, there's lots of things we can do at farm level, whether it's around nutrient balance, whether it's around manure storage, whether it's around soil water, that need to be done if we're being honest, at farm level. The third one, and for me, is ammonia. And if we stand back and look at where we've gone in ammonia, we're now compliant. We've had significant reductions in ammonia. So, I'm really positive about the things that can happen at farm level. If you're a farmer, you have, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were shouting that we needed to reduce ammonia, but the uptake of low emission slurry spreading, the uptake of lower crude protein concentrate, the uptake of protected urea has meant now we're in a good place from an ammonia point of view. We need to keep that momentum going with the water and the greenhouse gases. And the last one, Stuart, just to kind of draw that one out, is in terms of dairy calf to beef. It's if we look at it now and look at I suppose if we're being really honest, the narrative in the industry maybe 3 or 4 years ago was, how do we manage the calves? Now we look at it as it's a huge opportunity. Dairy calf to beef is a huge opportunity, and the uptake of sex semen by farmers, the uptake of high DBI genetics by farmers is just absolutely amazing. So the opportunities in that area are very big. So like if you look at all this together, you have a very strong story in terms of what can happen right across the industry in different places. Now we need to focus, as well as focusing on those areas, we need to focus on a number of other areas, and cost of production, growing more grass, for me, are key to those.
Okay, so Laurence, I suppose just to sum it up, and what you said there, basically challenges have come towards us over the last number of open days, not just in 2023, all of those that have gone before. Many of the things that you've mentioned were actually showcased at all of those open days, and 2025 is going to be no different. There'll be some stuff that people will see in 2025 that they haven't seen before. Is going to be the next thing that's basically going to change the industry, or the next big step for the industry. So people really, really need to attend next week, don't they?
They do, sure. But just the other thing, like when you look at the willingness and the ability of dairy farmers to take on some of the stuff, it's just amazing. Like protected urea. Who knew anything about protected urea 10 years ago? Dairy beef index, sex semen use. They're just examples of, in fairness to the industry and its ability to move with the changes that are happening. And what we're going to see is more of that next week.
Very good. So do you want to remind people of the start times and so forth?
The 2nd of July, so Wednesday, the 2nd of July next week, Moorepark 2025. Gates open 8:30. And it'll be well signposted for anyone coming on any direction. We really want to see people there, and we want people to engage. If it's a criticism or anything other than that, we're perfectly willing and able to take it. So we look forward to it.
Very good, Laurence. Thanks for joining me on this week's show. That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Age podcast. My thanks to Laurence for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. You can also email us on our dedicated Dairy Age email address, dairyage.podcast@teagasc.ie. I'm Stuart Childs, and join us next time for your Dairy Age.